Name something that gets passed around.
A joint.
A joint?
Legalized marijuana is always a very difficult question.
The time is long overdue for us to remove the federal prohibition on marijuana.
From now on, I smoke weed exclusively with white people.
Well, I'll get high next time.
They're walking on their pants with their cap on backwards, listening to Enema Man, the Snoopy Poop Dog.
There's definitely cannabis in there, and it makes sure that I can sleep now.
What's to keep somebody from getting all potted up on weed and then getting behind the wheel?
Don't piss off your old dealer.
Marijuana is not the kind of thing that ought to be legalized.
I know you're not supposed to admit that you smoke pot, but I don't drink alcohol.
Let's get out of here. I have some really good weed back at the hotel.
I used to smoke marijuana.
I don't care if an adult wants to smoke marijuana. They shouldn't go to prison for it either.
All right. Welcome back, everybody. It's a beautiful Monday here in legal Potland, Oregon. I'm Radical Russ. Glad to have you here. We got a full batch of shows this week. And then next week, we'll go Monday through Thursday. But then next Friday, the 17th, I will be on an airplane making my way to Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. And then a Greyhound bus ride from Philly to Atlantic City, New Jersey, where I'll be a part of Meet the Experts 5. This is a medical cannabis conference being put on for East Coast professionals by Robert Platshorn, a.k.a. Bobby Tuna. You can learn more by going to meetexperts.org, meetexperts.org, and learn all about the two-day seminars in Atlantic City on March 18th and 19th. All right, I wanted to talk about Jimmy Carter, the 39th president of the United States. Was he 39? Let me think. 45, 44, 43, 42, 41, 40. Yeah. 39th president of the United States. And the reason I bring it up is because of fake news. You know, you hear Donald Trump all the time talking about fake news, which is his definition for any true story that paints him unfavorably. But there really is a problem of fake news in our discourse. And this comes to mind in a piece that's put up by PolitiFact today. Now, there's been previous marijuana fake news. Last month, we told you the story of Massroots calling out the weed blog and the joint blog for, stories like federal study will pay you $3,000 a week to consume cannabis, right? Stuff that's fake. But now PolitiFact, outside of our, little echo chamber, has jumped into the fray. They designated a pants on fire lie to the popular Facebook post that claims that former President Jimmy Carter cured his cancer by using medical cannabis. The PolitiFact article says, in 2015, Carter was really diagnosed with skin cancer that had spread to his brain, but in December of that year announced the cancer's growth had been arrested and reversed. Instead of medical marijuana, Carter announced he had been trying a new drug called Keytruda that appeared to help control and reverse the metastatic melanoma. Now, the fake story came out December 7th, 2015 from a website called satiratribune.com. Like that should have been the clue right there that it was satirical, Satira Tribune. But the biggest giveaway, I should say, that this was a fake news story was when they quoted President Carter as saying, quote, "I smoke 2 joints in the morning, I smoke 2 joints at night, I smoke 2 joints in the afternoon, and it makes me feel all right," end quote. Which, of course, the top marijuana sites recognized are the lyrics from the Toys' 1983 song, Smoke 2 Joints. And thus, it was pretty easy to tell it was satire. But far too many marijuana aficionados did not get the joke or only read the headline. And so throughout all 2016, almost every week, I would see this post pop up in the cannabis sphere on Jimmy Carter cured his cancer with cannabis. Now, it's not that Jimmy Carter hasn't been a prominent figure when it comes to the reform of marijuana laws. Of course, as president of the United States, he bravely campaigned in 1975 for the legalization or the decriminalization of marijuana, and then took that to Congress in 1977 in this amazing piece of video.
I support a change in law to end federal criminal penalties for possession of up to 1 ounce of marijuana, leaving the states free to adopt whatever laws they wish concerning marijuana.
1977, Jimmy Carter coming out in full-throated support for the decriminalization of marijuana. And lately, though, President Carter has kind of flip-flopped on his stance on marijuana. Back in December of 2012, just after Colorado and Washington had legalized marijuana, he was on a CNN program where Suzanne Malveaux asked him his opinions on those two states having recently legalized marijuana.
What do you make of the legalization of marijuana and the states that have legalized marijuana?
Well, I'm in favor of it. I think it's okay. I don't think it's going to happen in Georgia yet, but I think we can watch and see what happens in the state of Washington, for instance, around Seattle, and let the American government and let the American people see, does it cause a serious problem or not?
So that's Jimmy Carter in December of 2012 discussing marijuana legalization and said he thought it was okay. It wasn't just 6 months later that President Carter was disapproving of marijuana legalization in Washington and Colorado and praising the work of the anti-legalization group Project SAM. Now, up on my post on weednews.co, I have President Carter's complete 15-minute keynote speech that he made to National Families in Action, where he made his anti-marijuana comments. I'll just read you the quotes because we don't have them queued up in the video player. President Carter said, quote, "I do not favor legalization. We must do everything we can to discourage marijuana use, as we do now with tobacco and excessive drinking. We have to prevent making marijuana smoking from becoming attractive to young people, which is, I'm sure, what the producers of marijuana are going to try and do. I hope that Colorado and Washington, as you authorize the use of marijuana, will set up very strict experiments to ascertain how we can avoid the use of marijuana. There should be no advertising for marijuana in any circumstances and no driving under the influence. We need to avoid the use of marijuana, particularly among young people. I'm very proud of Patrick Kennedy and his Project SAM smart approaches to marijuana. I wish him and Kevin Sabet every success in their independent project to make sure marijuana use is handled responsibly." So, thanks, Jimmy. President Carter used to be such a great supporter and so common sense on this issue. I'm afraid he's been bamboozled by Kevin Sabet and these kinder, gentler drug warriors appealing to his Christian nature. We'll talk about that a little more, and we got a story on how legalization has saved a small town in eastern Oregon. Plus, we've got a look at the marijuana breathalyzer race among tech startups. I'm Radical Russ. We're back right after this.
This is the Russ Belville Show on CannabisRadio.com.
In the interest of fair and balanced journalism, the Russ Belville Show presents the anti-drug public service announcement of the day.
This is your brain. And this is heroin. This is what happens to your brain after snorting heroin. And this is what your body goes through. Wait. It's not over yet. This is what your family goes through. And your friends, and your money, and your job, and your self-respect, and your future. And your life. Any questions?
This has been the Russ Belville Show's anti-drug public service announcement of the day, exclusively on RadicalRuss.com.
Hey everybody, it's Radical Russ here from 420 Radio, inviting you to be like me and get your ink done at Lucky Horseshoe Tattoo, Fort Worth's most female-friendly, clean, sterile, awesome tattoo shop. Thomas and his crew are true artists who can design you a custom piece or use a design you bring in. Lucky Horseshoe Tattoo also offers all styles of tattooing as well as piercings and all-around fun. In the DFW area, stop by Lucky Horseshoe Tattoo and tell them Radical Russ sent you. Trust me, it'll feel awesome.
You're not high. You're listening to the Russ Belville Show.
Marijuana is probably the most dangerous drug.
Okay, well, maybe you're high, too.
This is Cannabis Facts from Robert Platshorn's TheSilverTour.org, supported by our donors and Hemp Inc., poised to lead America's hemp revolution at hempinc.com. In 1937, the second most prescribed medicine, marijuana, was banned. It wasn't about marijuana. The paper, oil, and chemical industries lobbied to end hemp farming. No longer labor-intensive, an acre of hemp produced more quality paper than 4 acres of trees. Plastics and fibers could be produced from a plant. Hemp can even produce 10 times the energy of today's ethanol. As marijuana prohibition ends, many states now allow farmers to again grow hemp. This was Cannabis Facts from TheSilverTour.org, an educational nonprofit supported by our donors and Hemp Inc., a public company poised to process America's hemp crop at hempinc.com.
Yarr, thar be pirates here. Har, 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 har. You're tuned into the Russ Belville Show, the voice of the marijuana nation, only on CannabisRadio.com.
Welcome back, everyone. As you know, I am the Red State refugee. I'm originally from the Boise, Idaho area, and I made my way out here to beautiful legal Potland, Oregon in 2003 because I discovered you could. Like, there's no border guards, there's no gates, there's no walls, there's no moats. You can just leave Idaho. And it turns out that a whole lot of people are making their way across the border thanks to legalized marijuana in the state of Oregon. If you followed the drama with Oregon's Measure 91, when we wrote it and passed it, it said that if you wanted to ban pot shops in your town, you had to have a vote of the people. The legislature went and made an exception for any county where the people in that county voted 55% or greater against legalization. In those places, the cities and counties can ban marijuana just through their county council or their city council. And that has led to just about the entire eastern 2/3 of the state of Oregon banning marijuana businesses. But there's one notable exception, and it's a story that's in the Oregonian and is being reported through Associated Press. So this must be a nationwide or even an international story. And it's the story of Huntington, Oregon. Huntington, Oregon is just 30 miles over the Idaho-Oregon border at the Snake River. So it is within an hour's drive of the Treasure Valley area in Idaho, the Boise metropolitan area, which boasts about a 600,000 person population. And Huntington has a population of 435 people. But in the town of Huntington, there are 2 pot shops. Huntington's city leaders voted in a 4-4 decision. Their city council split 4-4 as to whether or not they should ban pot shops. Their mayor had to break the tie, and he voted in favor of legalizing the pot shops. So now these 2 pot shops, they're Hotbox Farms and 420ville, they're just hundreds of yards apart on Washington Street, the main drive, the only drive through Huntington. It's like a one-road town. There's not even a stoplight in Huntington, Oregon, I don't think. But these 2 pot shops are the only pot shops near the Boise metropolitan area. So, in a town of 435 people, they're serving as many as 600 customers a day on a busy day. The Huntington councilman Chuck Gary said, quote, "When the dispensaries are really busy, it's 2.5 hours before customers get their product. So they mingle and they go to the store. They sit and have a hamburger or something. Every little bit of it helps when you're a small town." End quote. Folks are spending up to $14.40 a gram for marijuana in Huntington, Oregon. The city expects to receive $100,000 in taxes from just one of the city pot shops. The city's annual budget is $200,000. So already one pot shop has produced enough money to equal half of the city's annual budget. And that's without even considering what the state of Oregon will be paying, because Oregon takes 10% of the money that it makes on its statewide marijuana sales tax. It's a 17% tax statewide. 10% of the total take of that goes to law enforcement initiatives in cities and counties. So Huntington could even make more money off of their share of the state tax. While this has made very many Idaho residents happy and made the city of Huntington, Oregon very happy, the governor of Idaho is not too happy about this. That's Idaho's Governor Butch Otter, who's always been a strong critic of legalized marijuana. Medical marijuana initiatives have failed over the past couple of years. The legislature finally got around to passing a CBD oil bill for epileptic kids, and Butch Otter vetoed that. Vetoed CBD oil, he's so afraid of marijuana, he vetoed non-psychoactive CBD oil for epileptic kids, something that Utah started. Next door Utah, which is religiously and culturally damn near and politically damn near similar to Idaho, it wasn't too much for Utah to pass, but Idaho couldn't handle it. Now, the public pressure over his veto did get him to relent and sign an executive order that allows cannabidiol oil to treat 25 kids. They're doing a little pilot trial as an executive order for 25 kids. Too bad for you if your kid was number 26, I guess. The cops in Idaho, of course, are pointing out that they're dealing with an increased amount of marijuana coming across the state line since Oregon has legalized, and they believe, of course, a lot of that's coming from Huntington. They're finding that 80% of the license plates in the parking lots when they check out the two pot shops are Idaho plates. And it still remains a crime, of course, in the state of Idaho. It's still a misdemeanor to bring marijuana across the state's border. But I love this story because it's been reported in the Oregonian. I know the East Oregonian had a report on it, and some of the other smaller papers around the state of Oregon. But as this story spreads, you know it's going to be read by city councilors and county commissioners in small towns and rural counties, not just in Oregon, but all over the nation. And many of those people are going to look at a situation where they have twice as many people, or as many people as live in their town, coming in as customers, spending 2 hours frequenting the restaurants, frequenting the gas station, frequenting the stores. They're going to see one pot shop that makes up half the tax budget, and they're going to start to realize that their fears of marijuana do not outweigh their need for this tax revenue, their need for this economic revitalization. The town of Huntington has been on a death spiral for years now. Huntington is the kind of town that is one of those highway towns located on a major highway that later was bypassed when they put in the Interstate 84. So Interstate 84 runs from Boise to Ontario to Baker City. And if you want to go to Huntington, you have to go through Ontario, and then you got to take an exit to go like 4 mile drive before you can get to where Huntington is. So other than folks that are, diehard hunters and fishermen, there was nothing compelling anybody to ever drive through Huntington, Oregon until now. And I know so many of these small towns and rural counties that are struggling to put their budget together, that are desperate for some sort of growth industry, desperate for anything to create jobs, to create some economic movement in their city, in their town, are going to read this article, and they're going to realize that that is the solution, that opening up to legalized marijuana is the solution. And as we continue to experience legalized marijuana and all of the scare tactics and the fear mongering are proven to be false, that we don't see more kids using, that we don't see more wrecks on the freeways, that we're not seeing increases in hard drug use due to this, they're going to change their minds, and they're going to start allowing marijuana businesses. They're going to realize it's for their own good. Amazing how small towns, conservatives, and Republicans might actually win this fight for us.
My name is Inigo Montoya. You killed my father. Prepare to die.
All right, we got to take a break, and when we come back, we're going to take a look at the tech startups that are scrambling to come up with some sort of weed breathalyzer now that marijuana is legal in 8 states.
At Herbie's Cannabis Seeds, we pride ourselves on bringing you the best quality seeds from the world's most respected cannabis seed producers, all at the lowest online prices. You can find Herbie's Seeds at herbiesheadshop.com. All cannabis seeds are sold as souvenirs and as a means of preserving cannabis genetics. Herbie's Seeds in no way intends to condone, promote, or incite the use of illegal or controlled substances. We strongly urge all prospective customers to check their national laws prior to placing an order. Herbie's Seeds at herbiesheadshop.com. Proud sponsors of the Russ Belville Show and 420 Radio.
You're not high. You're listening to the Russ Belville Show.
I do support the use of medical marijuana, and I think even there we need to do a lot more research.
Okay, well, maybe you're high, too.
Georgia. Hi, this is Willie Nelson. Alcohol prohibition didn't work in the 1920s, and marijuana prohibition isn't working today. It's time we stopped arresting responsible marijuana smokers. It's the fair thing to do.
For more information, contact NORML, the National Organization for the Reform of Marijuana Laws. Call toll-free 888-67-NORML or visit their website at norml.org.
I have a package here for Radical Rick. Is there a Radical Rick here? How about a Rick Russ? Any Rick Russ? Somebody named Freddie Barack has sent him a package. Anybody? What is that? Sounds like a skunk. You're tuned into the Russ Belville Show, the voice of the marijuana nation, only on CannabisRadio.com.
All right, welcome back, everybody. Now that we're legalizing marijuana, there is a hue and cry from the folks in law enforcement for a marijuana breathalyzer. Oh my God, marijuana's legal. Now people might smoke and drive. Because, you know, for the past 70, 80 years, we've disobeyed that law on marijuana being illegal to possess. But we were steadfast in obeying the law about not smoking and driving. Come on now. Smoking pot and driving a car have been happening since the invention of cars. This is a solution in search of a problem, people. There is no stoned mayhem on the freeways. I love these politicians and law enforcement people that want to play this game like legalizing marijuana invents it. Like we were just sitting around minding our own business, and all of a sudden we passed this law that invented marijuana. Now we better figure out the whole driving thing. Folks, we figured out the driving thing. You do know that it's illegal to drive under the influence of marijuana, right? You do know that in all 50 states, an officer who feels that your driving is impaired by anything can arrest you for driving under the influence, or impaired driving, or reckless driving, or inattentive driving. We got a ton of laws to deal with people who aren't driving well on the freeways. But now that we've legalized marijuana, well, we've just invented it. Now there's this whole new concern. Oh my gosh. Folks, if there was any sort of real concern about marijuana and driving, we'd have seen it by now, don't you think? See, today, it's about 44%, somewhere in there, of high school seniors have tried pot in their lifetime. Back in 1979, that number was 60% of high school seniors. Now, keep in mind, high school seniors, age 17 and 18, are some of the worst drivers on the planet. You can extend that all the way to age 25. particularly when we're talking about males. Male drivers from 18 to 25, terrible. Well, the reasons why? Well, they take risks. They think that they're invulnerable. They got a macho streak. They want to impress a girl. Whatever. They make stupid decisions behind the wheel. Similarly, the greatest use of marijuana is found in the demographic of people aged 18 to 25. So if 18 to 25-year-olds are terrible drivers and 18 to 25-year-olds are the ones that are most likely to be using marijuana, and 18 to 25-year-olds were using a hell of a lot more marijuana, a hell of a lot more often in the late 70s, early 80s, let's just look at the driving statistics from there. Let's see how much there was an increase in traffic fatalities and accidents from 1970 to 1985. Right? Because, 1970, we didn't have a whole lot of marijuana smokers, really, at that point. A few 100,000, maybe a million, something like that. By 1980, 85, my God, we had millions of pot smokers. So obviously, if there's some sort of causal relationship between marijuana use and freeway accidents, car accidents, wrecks, whatever, we should have seen a mass escalation in those figures from 1970 to 1985, right? Wrong. We don't see it. In fact, what we have seen is a steady decline in traffic accidents, a steady decline in deaths on the roadways, injuries, and so forth. Now, you could make the argument that, well, maybe we'd have seen a much greater decline if people weren't smoking all that pot. This is like what I like to call the Michael Phelps still won a bronze medal argument, right? Like, Michael Phelps, the swimmer, he won like 22, was it 28, 29, whatever, however many, record number of gold medals. But like in his first Olympics and then like his second Olympics, there was a couple events where he only got a bronze medal, right? And he finished third. Like, you could make the argument, well, gee, maybe if Michael Phelps wouldn't smoke so much pot, those bronze medals have been gold medals. Like, yeah, I suppose so, but the guy is still the most decorated gold medal Olympian ever. Similarly, yeah, you could make the argument that without the pot smoking, maybe the roads would be even safer, but there's no way you can really prove that. So I like to believe that the roads are a whole lot safer because marijuana is no big deal when it comes to road safety. But that hasn't stopped companies now from trying to fulfill this public call for the marijuana breathalyzer. And I just feel kind of, I got a lot of worries about this. Number one, what you must say as a company to try to bilk investors, to have them throw money your way, to try to develop a technology to determine impairment in marijuana based on blood, saliva, breath, or hair, when you know damn well the science is going to prove that doesn't tell you squat. I couldn't do it. I couldn't turn to an investor and say, hey, I need you to, invest $10 million because we're going to make a marijuana breathalyzer that'll prove someone's impaired. When as a scientist, I would know there is no such technology, that it's not possible, that the way marijuana is metabolized in the body differs from person to person, differs from strain to strain, differs based on how much tolerance you have, and so forth. But they're going to do it anyway. They're going to move forward. There's Hound Labs and Cannabis Technologies, a couple of companies that are putting together these tests to find small amounts of THC in the breath. THC in picograms. Picograms, that's parts per trillion. Parts per trillion they want to try to pick up THC. And so here's the quote from the CEO and co-founder of Triple Ring Technologies that says, quote, in a relatively short period of time, we have been able to leverage our extensive team of scientists and engineers to translate Hound Labs' breakthrough science into a working prototype that can be used effectively at the roadside while incorporating their proprietary technology that has been validated against mass spectrometry, the gold standard of laboratory measurements. Okay. But here's the problem. Again, as their own Yoast Research Group website says, THC stays in body fluids for many days or even weeks, said Lynn from Hound Labs. Breath is the exception. THC can only be measured in breath for a couple of hours, then it disappears. This 2-hour period aligns with the window of impairment identified by researchers. Here, let me translate that for you. Here's what they're trying to say. They're saying that if they can detect parts per trillion of THC in your breath, it means you must have smoked in the past 2 hours. And if you've smoked in the past 2 hours, you're impaired. Anybody got an issue with that? Yeah, you ought to. You ought to have a huge issue with that. That's like saying if you detect alcohol on my breath, I'm too drunk to drive. Well, maybe I just had some mouthwash. Maybe I had a little Banaka Blast, a little air freshener, mouth freshener, right? Maybe I had a beer at lunch, but being a 240-pound man, that 12-ounce beer is not impairing me in the least. Now, with the breathalyzer with alcohol, we know that a number 0.08 or greater tells us a person is too impaired, because we know with relatively good scientific validity that someone at 0.08, regardless of their size, their tolerance, is going to be too impaired to operate a motor vehicle. So what's happening with this breathalyzer for cannabis is they're just trying to say that anybody who smokes pot, if we can detect it on their breath, they're too impaired to drive. And that just means they've been smoking in the past 2 hours. Well, folks, I could take a puff off a joint. I could hang out here for an hour and a half and then get in my car to go drive. I guarantee you that single puff on a joint has not impaired me in the least. But they will count that as a drunk driver, as an impaired driver, a drug-using driver. Now, of course, this does not tell us that someone's too impaired to drive. But what I'm afraid of is that the strong desire for a marijuana breathalyzer is going to lead to them redefining what we mean by an impaired driver. What I fear is that it will no longer be a question of whether you're too impaired to drive. It will be a question of whether or not you smoke pot. And what they'll do is it'll be, and the idea will be, well, this will be the justification. I can already make the argument for them. Well, if you smoked pot within the past 2 hours and then got behind the wheel of a car, that shows right there that you're being irresponsible. You're being irresponsible because you managed to impair yourself and then decided to get behind the wheel. Well, look, that person's not irresponsible if they can tell that they're not impaired. This isn't like alcohol where you get that false liquid courage where you're drunk off your ass, but you're like, I can drive. Give me my keys. I can drive. I'm fine. Pot smokers don't do that. In fact, when we put pot smokers through clinical, driving evaluations and simulators and road tests and stuff like that, and try to get them too stoned to drive, the researchers have to force them. The researchers have to kind of twist their arm and say, no, we want you to get behind the wheel. Because the people on pot go, dude, man, I am way too high to drive. I shouldn't be driving. And then they get behind the wheel and they do pretty decent. In other words, cannabis consumers overestimate how impaired they are. The complete opposite of an alcohol drinker who underestimates how impaired they are. But no, what's going to happen is because this breathalyzer can detect THC within a 2-hour window, the idea is not going to be that you're too impaired to drive. The idea is going to change to you're too irresponsible to drive. They're going to make it that, you smoked within 2 hours and drove. That was irresponsible of you. And they're going to bypass altogether the question of whether or not that was too impairing to you. DUI is going to be driving under irresponsibility, not driving under the influence, because they know they cannot scientifically prove impairment. They cannot scientifically prove that the influence of marijuana they're detecting is actually impairing us to a point where we can't handle driving a car. And the place where this is the most offensive is the fact that this THC breathalyzer thing wouldn't detect the metabolites of synthetic THC like Marinol. You know, that Schedule III drug approved by the federal government with a warning label that says, until you know how Marinol may affect you, do not drive or operate heavy machinery. But once you know how it affects you, get behind the wheel and have a good time. It's such hypocrisy. All right, stay tuned when we come back. We'll give you an update on what happened this weekend at the Vegas Cannabis Cup and other stories here at the Russ Belville Show.
This is the Russ Belville Show on CannabisRadio.com.
Hey everybody, it's Radical Russ here from 420 Radio, inviting you to be like me and get your ink done at Lucky Horseshoe Tattoo, Fort Worth's most female-friendly, clean, sterile, awesome tattoo shop. Thomas and his crew are true artists who can design you a custom piece or use a design you bring in. Lucky Horseshoe Tattoo also offers all styles of tattooing as well as piercings and all-around fun. In the DFW area, stop by Lucky Horseshoe Tattoo and tell them Radical Russ sent you. Trust me, it'll feel awesome.
You're not high. You're listening to the Russ Belville Show.
Sean Spicer, our press secretary, gave alternative facts to that.
Okay, maybe you're high too.
Hey, this is Willie Nelson for Normal. And I smoke pot and I like it a lot. I learned a long time ago that marijuana is a lot safer than alcohol. There's nothing wrong with the responsible use of marijuana by adults. It's time we stopped arresting and started respecting those who smoke marijuana responsibly. To learn what you can do to help, contact NORML at NORML.org or call toll-free 888-67-NORML.
Remember, friends, there's more to life than marijuana. I just can't remember what it is. Why'd I come in here? This is the Russ Belville Show on CannabisRadio.com.
Welcome back, everybody. 37 after the hour. And as you know, they had a Cannabis Cup in Las Vegas, or the Las Vegas area this weekend. But boy, what a bunch of hassles they had to go through. First of all, they planned the Cannabis Cup to be there in Las Vegas. And, of course, Nevada has a medical marijuana law. And Nevada's medical marijuana law was recently updated to have reciprocity for other states' medical marijuana cards. So, if you've got your medical marijuana recommendation from next door California or next door Arizona or any of the states with medical marijuana, you could come to Nevada, sign an affidavit, and then be able to purchase marijuana in their dispensaries, be able to smoke marijuana. And that was before they passed legalization this last year. So now they got legalization in Nevada, so High Times, we're all excited about this. We'll go out to Las Vegas, we'll put together a Cannabis Cup. And they further decided to work with a Paiute Indian tribe and put that Cannabis Cup on their tribal lands to add another level of acceptance, which is the federal government's compliance memo for Indian country that said, just like the states, the Indian country governments are allowed to move forward with their own marijuana policies. But then, mid-February, everything went to hell for High Times and the Cannabis Cup. So what happened is the federal attorney's office in Nevada, U.S. Attorney Daniel Bogdan, threatened the Cannabis Cup saying marijuana is still illegal under federal law, and they would enforce the Controlled Substances Act if they tried to distribute marijuana or have samples or anything like that. So for the Indians there, they gave them a call, and they said, hey, we're going to come by and visit you and have a talk about this. 5 minutes later, they show up, right? So Bogdan, the U.S. attorney, is there with reps from the DEA and agents from the FBI that show up to meet the Moapa Band of Paiute Indians Council. And they basically scared the hell out of them. They said if the festival was to go on, it would have to follow strict federal guidelines. So the Paiutes took cannabis out of the event. They asked High Times to take it out of the event, and High Times acceded to that demand. So this was the first time ever that a cannabis cup had no cannabis. There's just no cannabis at the cannabis cup. Plain edibles, plain cookies, and so forth. So the vendors, about a dozen booths were empty, according to reports on Leafly. And the event just turned into basically an expo and a concert. And if that wasn't bad enough, because that's going to kill a lot of the money that would be coming into High Times to put this kind of event on, the money that would be coming into the vendors who want to make their booth fees back, because a lot of folks aren't going to show up based on them not having any available items. And so they had the Cannabis Cup, and then they had their concert that night. Ludacris showed up for the concert. He says about 15,000 ticket holders showed and about 250 vendors, but they wouldn't provide any official comment on how many vendors or attendees dropped out after the event, after the announcement from the feds. So that night they have their concert. Ludacris performed, and then the next day they had to call off day 2 of this no cannabis cup because there was a weather advisory with winds 30 to 40 miles an hour, wind gusts as high as 60 miles an hour. And so we're talking about an event that's outside with a whole bunch of those, pop-up canopies. So a bunch of sails, really. So they canceled the second day of the Cannabis Cup and told people that if they still have their tickets, they could use them for the 421 to 423 event in San Bernardino, California. Well, I'm sure that pleased a lot of people that made their plans and took time off work and flew or drove to Las Vegas for day 2 of the Cannabis Cup to know that, hey, don't worry. You can just take time off and buy another plane ticket or spend some more gas money and go all the way to San Bernardino instead. Yeah. So this is just crazy, folks. This is, since we've had legalization. Okay, so keep in mind, so that when the Cannabis Cup was originally an Amsterdam thing, High Times would take their crew out to Amsterdam and they'd run the Cannabis Cup because, for so long that was the only place where you could really have such a thing, where people could legally, or at least were tolerated, smoking marijuana. But after we got, the medical dispensaries running, in 2010, High Times held their first annual medical Cannabis Cup in San Francisco. Now, of course, I can cast a few aspersions on the use of the word medical in there, because folks, it's a rap concert and a marijuana expo and it's a party. It's not a medical event. There aren't people there. I don't want to get off on that tangent. Let's not go there. But anyway, there was a medical Cannabis Cup in 2010 in San Francisco, and High Times continued to expand these medical Cannabis Cups till they showed up in Los Angeles, in Seattle, Washington, in Denver, Colorado. And then, as legalization was taking place in 2012 and then through 2014 in Oregon, the Cannabis Cup started being banned. The first victim was Seattle. They held a Seattle Cannabis Cup in 2013, and then by 2015 we couldn't, or was it 2014? We couldn't have any more Seattle Cannabis Cups because the legislature in Washington felonized any such event. Made it a felony to hold a Cannabis Cup. So before marijuana was legal in Washington, you could hold a medical, quote unquote, Cannabis Cup in Seattle. But once it was legalized, it was banned. Portland, Oregon, we had the same situation. We legalized marijuana in 2014. They scrambled to put together a Portland Cannabis Cup. It got canceled because of the Liquor Commission saying that there could be no cannabis consumption in any public space. And any space that has a liquor license is a public space, even if they're not using the liquor license at the time. So High Times couldn't rent a hall or any place, a fairgrounds or anything like that, because all these big event locations have liquor licenses. Even though they weren't going to serve beer or alcohol, if they've got the license, you can't hold the event. So Portland, legal city, can't have a Cannabis Cup. Same thing happened in Denver. They got some problems going on in Denver where they had to pull the Cannabis Cup out of there. And now Las Vegas. So now Nevada is pulling the same kind of shenanigans to ban Cannabis Cups there. So we've got Portland, Seattle, Denver, and Las Vegas. The 4 major cities in 4 of the legal pot states where you cannot have a pot event. Like, the only place that we can have a pot event anymore is San Bernardino in San Francisco and Clio, Michigan, out there on the Speedway. It's insane. Now, this is changing. We've got Portland Normal's legislative committee is working on event permit legislation that could bring a Cannabis Cup to Portland. In Colorado, they're working on that whole public use initiative that had passed and how that's going to work as far as giving licenses out and such. But these states are going to have to realize that you can't legalize something but then tell people that they can only use it at home in their basement or with curtains drawn. Treat marijuana like alcohol did not mean treat the substances equally. It meant treat the users of those substances equally. I fail to understand how every city in America can have multiple outdoor festivals every year with copious amounts of alcohol being served and consumed, and yet get their knickers in a twist over the idea that potheads might be gathering someplace and smoking dope. Oh no. By the way, speaking of we were speaking of Amsterdam and how the Cannabis Cup began there. There's no Cannabis Cups in Amsterdam anymore either. They had some problems in Amsterdam. This was the 2014 High Times Cannabis Cup, the 27th one that they had. Local authorities wouldn't allow the permits. So High Times just isn't going to Amsterdam anymore, and they're concentrating on the American Cups and the Jamaican Cup that they just had. But now there are some other cannabis competitions that are emerging in the wake of the departure by High Times. There's the High Life Cannabis Cup that started in 1993 by the Dutch language magazine High Life, and that it's an underground, basically an underground kind of contest, kind of like a lot of the secret cups that you hear about. But then there's another cup, a couple of cups that have come up. The Elite Cup in Amsterdam and the Homegrown Cup in Eindhoven. The Elite Cup is held in late November with 2 coffee shops and 12 private entries and a Spanish cannabis social club. The second Elite Cup was held around the 420 holiday last year, and they increased to 60 entries with 12 categories. But participation is by invitation only. The Homegrown Cup happening in Eindhoven is also kind of a festival cup. It's in the south of the Netherlands. You can learn more about these from leafly.com. With Cannabis Cup gone, 2 new Dutch cannabis competitions emerge is the name of the story. Let's hope they get these things worked out soon. Lately, the proposals I've heard coming out of Oregon have talked about licensing for pot establishments that wouldn't let you serve alcohol or food there. The only thing that could be there is weed. I can see an argument for the alcohol because, mixing alcohol and weed is highly impairing, but why would you not want to allow food service at a place where people are going to have the munchies? Not cool.
The Russ Belville Show on CannabisRadio.com.
New beginner guitars and banjos are often constructed much better than ones built before your time. Why struggle? Get a new instrument or fix the old one. The trusted professionals at the Fingerboard Extension will evaluate your instrument for free. Repairs are priced for people who work for a living. Stop by the Fingerboard Extension downtown Corvallis at 120 Northwest 2nd Street today, or check out its inventory on the web at fingerboardextension.com.
You're listening to The Russ Belville Show.
In my view, the time is long overdue for us to remove the federal prohibition on marijuana.
You can find Radical Russ online everywhere. Warning. Hits taken on this show are larger than they appear. Do not try this at home. These people are professionals. Or at least they aim you to say that.
You're a loony.
A public service message from The Russ Belville Show. Pod 2.0. It's not your father's Woodstock weed. This is the Russ Belville Show on CannabisRadio.com.
All right, welcome back, everyone. 51 and a half after the hour. And to close out this hour, I wanted to talk about... sometimes I just have great difficulty understanding how people come to think the way they think. You already know how I have this huge problem with the attitude of marijuana as medicine of last resort. Right? We've talked about this in the past, where the medical marijuana laws are written where, all right, we'll let you have some cannabis, but only if you've tried every possible pharmaceutical that's recommended for that, and only if you've tried surgeries and that doesn't help you, and only if you're terminal, then we might let you have some pot. It's like ridiculous. As low as the side effects are from cannabis, as helpful as cannabis is for so many ailments, it should be the medicine of first resort. It should be the first thing you're trying. It should be the chicken soup of home remedies, okay? So I've always had that issue with this medicine of last resort. But let's talk about people who really are really down to their last resort. See, people are suffering from cancer and all sorts of terminal diseases, and they can't get experimental new treatments without interference from our FDA. There might be doctors in Mexico or Singapore or Austria that are working on some new unheard of treatment. But in America, our patients, well, if the FDA doesn't say it's medicine, it's just not medicine, and you can't use it. In other words, we have a bureaucratic impediment to dying people who are desperate to try anything. So, with that background, I want to tell you about this article I saw up on a website called statnews.com. And it's an opinion piece that says federal right to try legislation undermines patient protection and drug testing. So what's going on here is there is a right to try law, a concept called right to try, that many states have implemented or are trying to implement, and it might get some traction at the federal level. And what it is, it's the idea that if you're dying and it's your last resort, the FDA ought to stand out of your way and let you try something. Like, what's the worst that could happen? You might die? Like you're already dying. Give them a shot. Let them try the drug. So there's model legislation. This has been passed in more than 30 states. Even in Indiana, where Mike Pence, our current vice president, when he was governor, he signed a right to try law in 2015. And now Pence has met as vice president with patients and advocates that are trying to pass a federal right to try legislation. This would prevent the federal government from blocking state-level right to try laws, which would allow terminally ill patients to bypass the FDA's existing pathways for accessing experimental therapies. Now, we do have the Compassionate Use Act, the Compassionate Investigative New Drug Program, and this was how we got the first medical marijuana, how we got Robert Randall to sue the federal government for his affirmative need to use cannabis to stop his glaucoma. The article in Stat says, to date, there is no credible evidence that these laws have allowed a single patient to access an experimental therapy. The state right to try laws have not helped a single person. That's partly because clinical research is governed by federal law, which preempts state law. In addition, terminally ill patients already have two pathways for accessing experimental therapies. They can join a clinical trial or apply through that investigative new drug program that I had just mentioned. And according to this this article, he says between 2005 and 2014, the FDA received 8,922 applications for expanded access and approved 99.3% of them. The person writing this article is basically opposed to federal right to try legislation, and her first support here is that these almost 9,000 patients who applied to these programs to try these experimental drugs, 99.3% of them were approved. So we don't have a need for federal right to try. Well, that's a little bit disingenuous, if you ask me. Because this is a statistic, this 99.3 is the statistics of people who applied through these programs. It does not count the people who never applied because they didn't think it was possible, or they didn't meet a criteria, or whatever reason they might have for not signing up. Whereas, by comparison, you pass a federal right to try legislation, and there isn't this big headache of hassle and paperwork and FDA application processes. The FDA is, of course, against this as well. The bill would allow patients to bypass FDA review and exempts physician and drug companies from any liability related to the prescription or dispensing of these unapproved therapies. It also prohibits the FDA from considering the outcomes for right to try patients in its review when deciding whether to approve or reject the therapy. The bill doesn't offer any additional support or safeguards for patients. A therapy need only to have passed basic safety testing in a small number of healthy patients, which does not provide information on effectiveness. And the bill does not require insurance companies to cover the drugs or any associated costs. Okay, so she's trying to make the point that this bill strips dying patients of the protections offered by FDA oversight. What are we protecting them from again? The possibility that a drug might kill them. They're terminal. They don't give a shit. Well, don't you want to be protected from dangerous drugs? No. And they're worried that the patients that try these drugs wouldn't be able to sue the doctors or the drug companies because it hasn't gone through the FDA yet. Well, again, the person's dying. If it kills him, then he's not out anything. If it saves his life, he's happy about it. So what's the problem? Every day I turn on the TV and I see law firms advertising for mesothelioma and all these other court cases, these class action lawsuits for some drug or some medical device or some treatment that was approved by the FDA. And yet now they're having to go back and sue them because the thing didn't work. So that protection still exists once it's gotten through the FDA, but if someone wants to trade that for being able to access a drug sooner to save their life, why shouldn't they be able to? I'm Radical Russ, baby. Until next time, take care of each other, tokers.
This is the Russ Belville Show. The Russ Belville Show is blogging and podcasting daily at radicalruss.com.
You grow it, you dry it, you roll it, you smoke it. You take a seed, you plant it, you grow it, you dry it, you roll it, you smoke it. You take a seed, you plant it, you grow it, you dry it, you roll it, you smoke it.
The Russ Belville Show is blogging and podcasting daily at RadicalRuss.com.